Welcome back. You're listening to the panel discussion, Government's Approach to Digital Innovation During COVID, sponsored by ServiceNow on Federal News Network. I'm your host, Jason Miller. My guests today are Pablo Stern, the Senior Vice President for IT Workflow Products at ServiceNow, Yemi Oshinaye, the Deputy CIO for the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, and Kashit Pandya, the Deputy CIO for IT Operations at the IRS. Before break, we started talking about the cost savings and this idea of the hybrid environment. I think, Pablo, you mentioned that. And that's actually a great segue to the cloud discussion, because digital transformation, you got to talk about cloud, you got to talk about specifically software as a service, which I know from talking to the folks, for instance, at FedRAMP, there was a huge push over the last year for more software as a service, services, CSPs that were FedRAMPed specifically for that. So Kashit, lead us off. Cloud is not the panacea. We know that, but you got to find the right balance.
Absolutely, Jason, and you hit the nail on the head. The cloud is not the panacea. It is not the magic bullet, and cloud in and of itself can't be the strategy. Cloud is a tool that is leveraged for your strategy that you have already developed and established. For us at the IRS, cloud is certainly a key element and a key driver of our overall IT strategy, and we plan on aggressively leveraging the cloud. As we look at our cloud, we are very careful to ensure that we don't fall into the trap of that misguided notion or misconception that cloud is the magic bullet. Cloud fixes all of your problems and challenges that you're facing and encountering with your applications or resource management on-prem. We are saying cloud first. That is our priority. That is our focus. But we're adding a slash after first to say, let's be cloud smart. Let's ensure that we are aware and cognizant of what we are migrating, why we're migrating, and why it truly is a benefit for the agency, which ultimately, of course, is going to make sure it's a benefit for all of our stakeholders, which includes our internal employees and our taxpayers. So it is much more about cloud first, cloud smart, than just saying put everything in the cloud and therefore everything will automatically be better.
Not surprisingly, sometimes IRS gets a little bit of a bad rap of being stuck on COBOL and those types of systems. Generally speaking, I'm not sure you have that number in front of you. 20% of your apps are in the cloud, 80% are in the cloud. Do you know offhand?
We have roughly about, I'd say, 60 to 70 applications that are in the cloud right now. And it's a varying degree of when we say cloud, some are as a platform, some are a software as a service. We are looking to start building out our footprint from an infrastructure as a service perspective as well. So while we have some, like I said, about 60 to 70 applications now, we have developed a cloud strategy and cloud roadmap that is going to be much more aggressive in how fast we migrate those additional applications that are currently on-prem into the cloud. Again, keeping our focus on why we're doing that. Right? Making sure there are benefits that we can derive and will derive from that migration.
Jason, I'll jump in here because one thing we've looked across our largest customers, of which many of the folks both we're talking through today, as well as other agencies in the U.S. government are included, are self-reporting probably around that 20 to 30% is what we're hearing across, again, the largest customers that we have, with a goal of getting to 50% in the next 3 to 5 years. And I love what Kashit said about cloud smart, because it really, the strategy, while cloud first is a priority for a lot of our customers, it's a cloud smart strategy that's going to get you to your destination. Because if you think of it over the next 5 years, you're going to be in this hybrid world. And in that hybrid world, you're actually increasing your complexity, because you still have to manage everything that you have on-prem while you're building out these new applications. And so making sure that you're driving the ones that are highest value, most important, they're going to drive the best outcomes to the cloud first, is really where we see like the most success amongst our customers.
I think you're spot on, Pablo. Being able to manage that hybrid environment is really important. One of the things that we saw as we got into our cloud journey is once you get into one area and you have multiple areas, I think you mentioned it earlier, Pablo, is as having the fabric. Because if you're in a cloud hosting environment, you have a platform and you have SaaS, those entities have to start to communicate. So how you integrate through APIs, how you manage what tools help you build that is very important. And you have to overlay your business strategy with, what's your data flows, how you want to save money, at the same time, making sure that your architectural roadmap meets the same business strategy. And that, it's easy to say here on the panel, but that's one of those very difficult things that you need a ton of internal and support staff to be able to do. I think we've had a lot of vendor collaboration to be able to get where we are today, but I think it's critical to mention that.
One, if I can jump in, Jason, just one more comment. One of the conscious efforts that we are making from a cloud perspective, knowing that the established hybrid cloud or management is going to be challenging, is trying to limit the number of presence or the areas where we have a presence. So instead of identifying 5, 6, 10 different cloud service providers where we want to build out some infrastructure, let's ensure that we are not expanding our footprint larger than it becomes for us to manage, and therefore perhaps limiting where we establish our presence to begin with. Perhaps start with your Amazon or your Azure or your Google, and limit it to the number that we have to now be responsible for manage until we are at a point where we can say we are completely off-prem, and therefore we can now start expanding into additional cloud service providers.
Pablo, I want to go back to something you said about 20 to 30% of your largest customers are in the cloud with the goal of getting 50%. Now, is this public and private sector, or more public sector, or just both?
It's both, and I'd say it's like these are the largest customers that we have, so it really covers a lot of the public sector as well, because they are some of our largest partners and customers. And I'd say it does depend a little bit. Like if you go down the private sector, depending on the industry that you're in, you will see technology, financial services be further ahead potentially. But I'd say like in general, it's pretty consistent. And there aren't places where we see like huge swaths way ahead or huge way behind. I think as smaller companies, it's a lot easier to do, or smaller agencies, like you may have more flexibility. But like when you're managing a large set of employees, you have a large constituent base that you're trying to deliver services to, like that really breeds some of the complexity that you have to really manage.
I'm glad you brought up the complexity piece, because that was the other piece I thought maybe I could put you on the spot on. Kashit was talked about IRS is really trying to not have cloud sprawl. And I think that's been a challenge for a lot of agencies. Is there a way to manage that? And are you seeing agencies who are able to manage that? Or does it start with a centralized cloud program management office? Because I could see, it's so easy to spin up an instance or move to software as a service and not tell the CIO's office. Now, we know with FITARA, you're supposed to tell them, but we also know that that's a part of that culture change. Pablo, what's the answer here, if there is one?
Yeah, so I think what started out was as teams are moving to innovate more quickly, it does become a bit of a Wild West out there. You're enabling teams, they're taking out credit cards, they're swiping, they're going to multiple different clouds, they're using multiple different tool chains. And I think that the reality is that to a certain extent, you want to empower your application, your dev teams to be able to move quickly. But that does come with a certain cost and a certain amount of complexity. And so what Kashit said is what we're seeing with a lot of our customers, public and private, which is there's a view of, okay, look, it may not be a single cloud strategy, but we're going to go try to focus on the ones that are going to be the highest value. And you may end up having multiple different pipelines, with some teams using a pipeline that Microsoft has or an open source pipeline. But in the end, the piece that Yemi hit on, I think, is what everybody's really singling out, which is how do you get to that fabric? Because in the end, you want to empower your teams, you want them to run quickly, but you need to make sure that as a technology leader, you have full visibility across the entire spectrum. Both the stuff that you have that's waterfall on-prem and all the stuff that you have in cloud that may have multiple different tool chains. And that factory that you have, the software factory that's helping build those, may actually have a few different places where you're putting stuff out into other clouds or potentially different tool chains. And so the thing that we've been very focused on based on this feedback from customers is helping bring that together to avoid both the silo of technology and really people and process. So you're avoiding that swivel chair. And while at ServiceNow, we don't see ourselves as being everything for every single app team, what we do see is we see that we have the ability to enable and empower the technology leaders to be able to do that across these factories that are being built out.
Yeah, I'll just add to that. I think you mentioned also Jason Fatara and being able to report. I think one of the things we did is we don't want to chase scale, we want to enable scale. So one of the good news stories, I probably will love this. I mean, with ServiceNow, we actually enable citizen development, which our HR group, we allow them to develop, but you can only develop using automated governance. You have to use the pipeline we build. You can create anything you want. It's going to go through the pipeline. When it gets ready for that final push to production, we do a review so that we actually enable the folks that know the intricacies of the business to build it. Why not? There's so much more in IT that we have to do from a software development, a management, and infrastructure perspective, that allowing citizens to help us scale is where we need to be. And we still need to sustain it. So it allows us to do more with less, to be quite honest.
Yeah, I mean, I want to go down the path of that enablement and the development, the pipeline, but let me take a half a step back before we go there. USCIS was in the cloud much before a lot of agencies. You all could have seen that cloud sprawl happen much more quickly. Have you all dealt with that issue? And if so, how have you dealt with it? And then how's that led to a successful implementation of DevSecOps?
Yeah, so we definitely had to trip over ourselves just a little bit. So, when we first got in, and really that's kind of what I talked about before about optimize. When you migrate things and what we call that lift and shift in there, you see the bill jump on you. You're like, well, wait a minute, that's not what we expected. And it's really looking at the paradigm. If something's going into the cloud, we need to be leveraging cloud services. If we just wanted to switch a VM or switch a resource, we could do that in a data center. So, we got smarter about looking first at network paths, looking second at, what can we leverage when we put things in the cloud? And also here's a paradigm. Is it hosting, platform, or is it SaaS? We should know that before we start moving workloads. And it's not really about moving systems, it's moving workloads in a smart manner. So we know what we're putting in a Salesforce or a ServiceNow or an Amazon or in Google, and we leverage those services. Because let's face it, there are so many cloud services. At some point, we're going to be a plethora of different clouds integrating, and underlying it's going to be a network that links it. So we took a step back and took a look at that. So anytime we move or build a workload, we're looking at that first, and that enabled us to optimize. And now we have this thing where we're looking at it's called our CTO called it Clean My Cloud. So we're looking at it every month. So when you put something in the cloud, if you haven't done something to optimize it, we kind of call you out. So we gamified it a little bit.
That's great. We'll have to follow up with you. Clean my cloud, or clean the cloud, or I think adding a little bit of fun to it is important to keep people paying attention. Kashit, as you guys are going into the cloud, are you guys mostly looking at software as a service, or again, taking Yemi's perspective? It depends. I mean, what workload makes sense? Are you going into it with that same question? Is this platform? Is this infrastructure? Is this software?
It really does depend. We haven't narrowed down to we will only use software as a service for all of our future migration activities. It does depend on what it is that we are migrating. To Yemi's point, what is that workload that we are looking to migrate? And I think depending on what that workload is, the selection will be work software as a service, IaaS, PaaS. But we are not limiting ourselves to say this is the only option that exists and this is the only option we'll pursue. We are expanding, if anything, to say what makes the most sense, what's the smartest move for us for this workload. So rather than say it has to be SaaS or PaaS or IaaS, we started looking at, does database as a service make more sense here? Does containers as a service make more sense here? Really trying to figure out what is optimal for the workload that's being moved. What is the optimal working or operating model when it ends up in the cloud space? So I would say we have presence and migrating applications that fit under each of those service models, but we are expanding on what are those service models to evaluate rather than focusing or narrow in on just one.
Yeah, and Jason, I'll build on that one a little bit. Because I think that, because you were talking about cloud smart, there's almost like a SaaS smart as well, if you will, which is we think about the single biggest asset that we all have is people, and making sure those people are working on the highest value work is really going to drive the best outcomes for our constituents. And so the more time that you're spending managing infrastructure, packaged software, things that may not be core competencies, like that's probably not the best investment. And again, like you have to figure out where that is. What are the things that matter at an infrastructure level versus at a platform level versus at a software level, and software that you're managing in infrastructure versus into the cloud. And the other thing also to think of is if you then go and look at where the investments are coming, like can you drive the same amount of innovation and energy, and are you going to put the same amount of investment to the outcomes that solution is going to give to you, where you have like teams maybe 10 times or 100 times larger that are putting a lot of innovation and are trying to do so at rapid cadence on a monthly basis or bi-weekly basis. And so I think those have to be sort of brought into consideration, and then making sure that as you look across the gamut of your people, that you're really investing on things that are going to drive the highest value for your organization.
Yeah, and just one more thing to add on to that, Jason. For us, I mentioned the spectrum of as a service that we are currently evaluating or leveraging. From a target state perspective, however, we know that there are greater gains to get away from when we get away from IaaS. Right? We already have data centers in place now. IaaS really would just be an expansion of our current data center, as opposed to leveraging the benefits that platform or software as a service provides. So while we are pursuing or leveraging IaaS now, we know our target state has to be higher up in the stack as a service perspective, so we really start using platform and software as a service.
I think that's a great point that we're going to delve into in the next segment. So let's take a quick break, and when we'll come back, we'll continue our conversation. You're listening to the panel discussion, Government's Approach to Digital Transformation During COVID, sponsored by ServiceNow on Federal News Network.